We like to imagine medieval knights as noble heroes in shining armor, polite, honorable, riding out to defend the helpless and protect the innocent. But that image was written in poetry, not in blood. On real battlefields, chivalry was never a shield for ordinary people. It was a code created by a warrior elite, for a warrior elite, a set of rules that mostly applied when knights dealt with other knights. If you were a peasant, a captured common soldier, or a so-called heretic, that code suddenly became very flexible. Chivalry praised heroic violence, promised honor and salvation for killing in the right cause, and turned professional fighters into saints in armor. At the same time, medieval writers were already worrying about how brutal these men really were, and whether their beautiful ideals could control their swords at all. In this video, we are going to peel away the romantic legend and look at the dark side of chivalry. When honor became an excuse, mercy had a price tag, and the people knights claimed to protect were often the ones who suffered the most. Let's start with what everyone thinks they know about chivalry. A knight was the perfect gentleman warrior, brave in battle, loyal to his lord, devout to God, generous to the poor, and always courteous, especially to ladies. That's the image from movies, books, and every history lesson. But where did it come from? Chivalry as an ideal first took shape in the 12th century, blending the raw warrior culture of early medieval Europe with Christian values. Church leaders and poets turned the knight into a symbol, God's champion on earth, a man who could fight savagely and still remain pure. By the 13th century, lists of virtues appeared everywhere. Geoffrey de Charny, a 14th century knight and author of the Book of Chivalry, described the perfect knight as someone who combined prowess in arms with honor, piety, and good manners. Prowess meant raw strength and skill at killing. Honor meant keeping your word even to an enemy. Piety meant fighting for the faith. And courtesy meant acting like a civilized man in court, not just a brute on the field. Literature made it all glow. The Song of Roland, an epic from around 1100, shows Roland dying heroically rather than flee or betray his king. His loyalty and courage became the blueprint for every knightly tale that followed. Arthurian romances by Chrétien de Troyes took it further. Knights like Lancelot quest for the Holy Grail, rescue damsels, and duel with perfect honor. These stories flooded courts across France, England, and Germany, turning chivalry into a fantasy that nobles paid poets to repeat. The church got involved too. Popes and bishops promoted knights as defenders of Christendom. During the Crusades, they promised salvation to anyone who fought for the Holy Land. Suddenly, killing Muslims or heretics wasn't just allowed, it was holy. Lists of chivalric commandments appeared, like the 10 Commandments of Chivalry from 13th century texts. Thou shalt make war against the infidel without cessation and without mercy. Thou shalt never lie. Thou shalt be generous to everyone. By the 15th century, the Duke of Burgundy even wrote down 12 virtues for knights: faith, charity, justice, sagacity, prudence, temperance, resolution, truth, liberality, diligence, hope, and valor. Knights swore oaths at dubbing ceremonies to live by these rules. They wore crosses, went on pilgrimages, confessed their sins before battle. The message was clear. A true knight was a saint with a sword. If you read only these sources, sermons, epics, treatises, chivalry seems noble. Knights would protect widows and orphans, spare defeated foes, live humbly despite their power. They would channel their violent skills into just causes, making the world safer for the weak. But here's where the story cracks. These ideals were mostly written by clerics, poets, and knights themselves. In royal courts or monasteries, far from muddy battlefields, they described what knights should be, not what they were. Even contemporary writers noticed the gap. Chroniclers like Jean Froissart praised heroic deeds, but also recorded knights burning villages and ransoming prisoners for profit. The church complained constantly about knights who fought for gold, not God. So why did this perfect image stick? Because it was useful. It gave violent aristocrats a way to feel moral about their profession. It let kings and popes motivate armies. And it inspired beautiful stories that made everyone forget the blood underneath. Chivalry on paper was a dream of controlled violence, but knights were men bred for war, whose survival depended on plunder and power. What happened when those ideals met reality? That's where the darkness begins. Those beautiful ideals didn't exist in a vacuum. Knighthood was first and foremost a profession, a brutal job passed down through noble families. From childhood, boys trained to fight, ride, and kill. By their teens, they were raiding, hunting, and serving as squires in wars. Prowess wasn't just a virtue, it was their identity. Without skill at arms, a knight was nothing. But war wasn't cheap. Armor, horses, weapons, and squires cost a fortune. Lords and kings paid for campaigns, but knights needed more. That's where plunder came in. Armies lived off the land, but knights took it further. They organized chevauchées, lightning raids deep into enemy territory, burn villages, slaughter livestock, destroy crops, kidnap peasants for ransom. The goal? Terrify the enemy's economy and fill your own purse. Take the 100 Years' War. English knights under the Black Prince raided France in 1355. They burned over 500 villages, killed thousands of peasants, looted everything movable. Chronicler Jean Froissart called it a great chevauchée, knights riding through fields of fire, herding stolen cattle like triumphant cowboys. French knights did the same in retaliation, trampling their own countryside and robbing locals to pay for revenge. Peasants paid the price. Knights saw them as resources, not people protected by chivalry. Bishop Warren of Beauvais complained in 1023 that knights were robbing villagers, kidnapping them, and burning homes, so he pushed for oaths against it. But oaths meant little. During the Jacquerie Revolt of 1358, when French peasants rose up against noble abuses, knights crushed them mercilessly. 40 knights faced 9,000 rebels at Meaux and slaughtered thousands, then burned the town to ashes. Froissart wrote, "They mowed them down in heaps and slaughtered them like cattle. One knight dead, thousands of peasants gone." Ransom was the other dark engine. Knights rarely killed noble captives if they could profit. Capture a rival lord, hold him for gold. A duke might fetch millions. Even minor knights paid thousands. Bertrand du Guesclin, captured in 1360, cost 100,000 francs, a fortune. King John II of France, 3 million gold crowns after Poitiers in 1356. Knights hunted high-born enemies like businessmen chasing deals. Tournaments mimicked this. Capture an opponent, take his horse and armor as prize. This wasn't rogue behavior, it was the system. Kings encouraged plunder to avoid paying armies. Knights got a share, 1/3 of loot in some contracts. Archers and men-at-arms followed suit, but knights led the raids, decided who lived or died for profit. Chivalry's response: silence or justification. Plunder was war's necessities. Killing peasants, they weren't worthy of knightly mercy anyway. The code governed duels between equals, not terror against inferiors. Survival as a knight meant embracing this. Mercy cost money. Violence paid dividends. Generosity? Only after you had taken everything first. The same men who knelt in church confessed their battlefield sins while counting stolen gold. When you realize knighthood was a violent business first and a moral code second, the cracks widen. What happened when faith and plunder collided in holy wars? That's where chivalry got truly twisted. Now imagine that violent elite handed a holy excuse to kill. That's what the Crusades did. From 1095, popes like Urban II called on knights to reclaim Jerusalem from Muslims. The promise? Forgiveness of all sins, eternal salvation, and all the loot you could carry. Chivalry met religion, and the result was explosive. Knights flocked to the cause. Peter the Hermit's People's Crusade slaughtered Jewish communities along the Rhine in 1096, thousands dead before the main armies even marched. But the real knights shone in the First Crusade. After a 2-year siege, they took Jerusalem in 1099. What followed was a massacre. Crusaders waded knee-deep in blood through streets piled with bodies. Muslim chronicler Ibn al-Athir wrote that they killed everyone they found, women, children, the elderly. Estimates range from 40,000 to 70,000 dead, men, women, and babies. Fulcher of Chartres, a Christian eyewitness, admitted, "In this temple, nearly 10,000 were killed. Indeed, if you had been there, you would have seen our feet colored to our ankles with the blood of the slain." Chivalry? They called it God's will. The Albigensian Crusade against Cathar heretics in France was even worse. In 1209, papal legate Arnaud Amalric besieged Béziers. When asked how to separate heretics from Catholics, he allegedly said, "Kill them all. God will know his own." Whether he said it or not, that's what happened. 20,000 people slaughtered. Entire families hacked apart in churches. The city burned for weeks. Knights like Simon de Montfort led the charge, earning land and titles for holy slaughter. Richard the Lionheart showed mercy's limits. After capturing Acre in 1191, he held 2,700 Muslim prisoners. Saladin delayed ransom payments. Richard's response? Mass execution. Knights lined them up on the beach at Ayadir and beheaded them all, men, women, children, in full view of Saladin's army. No profit, no threat, just rage and holy vengeance. Why no mercy? Chivalry's rules didn't apply to infidels. The code prized ransom between Christian knights, but Muslims were Saracens, enemies of God. Killing them earned indulgence, wiped clean a lifetime of sin. Even Saladin executed Crusader prisoners in retaliation, but knights framed their massacres as righteous. Ransom still ruled when it paid. During the Third Crusade, knights captured emirs and sultans, holding them for huge sums. But poor soldiers or civilians? Slaughtered. The siege of Antioch in 1098 saw crusaders eat their dead horses, then massacre surrendering Muslims hiding in the citadel. Chivalry's generosity stopped where profit or piety demanded blood. Church leaders tried to rein it in. Later crusades had rules: spare non-combatants, but knights ignored them. The Fourth Crusade sacked Constantinople in 1204. Fellow Christians. They raped nuns, looted relics, massacred civilians for 3 days. One chronicler called it an atrocity in its scale of rapine, slaughter, and wanton destruction. Venetian knights and Frankish nobles split the loot like pirates. This was chivalry in holy war, a code that sanctified violence against the other. Knights fought for salvation, loot, and glory, with faith as their alibi. Mercy existed, but only if you were rich, noble, and Christian. Everyone else was collateral in God's game. When even holy causes exposed the hypocrisy, where did that leave the weak at home, the people knights swore to protect? If you're enjoying this look at the real Middle Ages, the gritty truth behind the legends, please hit that like button and subscribe. It really helps us bring more myth-busting history like this to you. Now let's see what chivalry meant for the people knights swore to protect. Holy wars were the extreme, but back home chivalry's protection for the weak was even more selective. Knights swore to defend widows, orphans, and the church. Poets sang about rescuing damsels, but who counted as worthy? Hint: not the people who actually needed it most. The code was written by nobles, for nobles. It governed behavior between knights, fair duels, ransoms for equals, oaths between lords. Peasants? Women without noble blood? Heretics or rebels? They fell outside the circle. A 12th century poet like Chrétien de Troyes made it explicit. A knight must not dishonor a highborn lady on the road, but if he fought another knight for her, he could do with her as he pleased. Common women, no rules at all, everyday life proved it. Knights oppressed peasants as a matter of course. Bishop Werin of Beauvais in 1023 begged knights to stop plundering the property of the poor, seizing hostages and torturing them for money. They didn't. During the 100 Years' War, French knights trampled their country underfoot, robbing and pillaging the peasants' goods, wrote Jean de Venette. Count Waleran caught peasants cutting wood. He chopped off their feet, ruining their value to their lord. Women suffered worst. Rape was a weapon of war. Invading knights targeted village women as humiliation. Peasant Joan of Arc rose partly because English knights burned her village and assaulted locals. Noble daughters got protection, marriage alliances, but low-born women were spoils. Sir John Arundel and his gang invaded a convent in 1450, raped the nuns, stole their goods, then drowned them at sea. Even church oaths failed. The Peace and Truce of God movements, 10th, 11th centuries, tried banning attacks on non-combatants. Knights signed on, then ignored it. Clerics grouped knights with bandits as society's curse. Peasants revolted repeatedly. England 1381, France 1358, screaming against noble abuse. John Ball preached, "When Adam delved and Eve span, who was then the gentleman?" Chivalry's defenders claimed knights fought off Vikings or raiders. True in early days, but by the High Middle Ages, knights preyed on their own people. A knight killing a free man faced fines or trial, eventually. But peasants had little recourse. Local lords protected their men. Bishops excommunicated abusers, rarely enforced. Women's rights? Wives could sue abusive husbands in church courts, but enforcement was spotty, and knights held the swords. Nunneries offered refuge for noble girls. Peasants had nowhere. The hypocrisy fueled resentment. Peasants saw knights as parasites living off their labor while claiming divine favor. Chivalry demanded generosity after you'd taken everything first. This wasn't every knight every day. Some lived closer to the ideal, but the system rewarded violence over virtue. Protect the weak only if they served your status or purse. When even literature started polishing the bloodstains, the myth took hold. With all this brutality, you might wonder, how did we end up with the image of the pure, shining knight? The answer is simple and uncomfortable. Nobles owned the pens, the money, and the memory. They could afford to decide which stories survived and which were quietly buried. From the 12th century onward, Europe's courts became story factories. Kings and great lords paid poets, clerics, and chroniclers to write about them. You didn't keep your job by saying, "My lord is a violent thug who burns villages for cash." You wrote about his piety, his generosity, his courage against horrible enemies. You turned campaigns of plunder into glorious chevauchées and massacres into God's justice. Look at the contrast. When knights razed Béziers or butchered people in Jerusalem, some eyewitnesses mentioned the horror, rivers of blood, corpses in churches. But later writers often focused on the victory itself, the banners, the heroism of a few noble leaders. They described the slaughter with a single line, then spent pages praising the courage of the attackers. The victims vanished into the background noise of war. Romances did even more damage to reality. Arthurian tales turned knights into supernatural paladins, searching for the Holy Grail, rescuing maidens, fighting dragons. Chivalry stopped being a messy negotiation between violence and faith and became a kind of spiritual superhero code. The knight's sword was always righteous, his violence always justified. No peasants screaming, no women raped during raids, no prisoners sold for ransom, unless it could be framed as noble sacrifice. Even history books from the Middle Ages often blurred into propaganda. Chroniclers like Froissart admired aristocratic patrons. They described jousts, feasts, and honorable duels in loving detail, while treating burned villages and dead commoners as scenery. When peasants revolted, writers called them rabble and beasts, and praised knights for putting them down. If a noble slaughtered thousands of villagers but donated a chapel afterwards, the chapel went down in history as proof of his piety. The church helped polish the armor. Preachers loved stories of repentant knights who laid down their swords, went on pilgrimage, or died defending the faith. They used these examples in sermons, turning a few exceptional cases into models for all. Meanwhile, everyday knightly bullying, extortion, and casual cruelty rarely made it into saintly biographies. Over centuries, these curated stories built a powerful myth. By the 19th century, romantic writers in Britain, France, and Germany completely fell in love with the Middle Ages. They resurrected chivalry as a golden age of honor, courtesy, and manly virtue. Painters showed spotless plate armor gleaming in the sun, not blood-soaked gambesons and broken teeth. Novelists like Sir Walter Scott gave the world noble knights and wicked peasants, brave damsels and villainous foreigners. Victorian gentlemen then used this sanitized chivalry to define their own ideals of masculinity. That's why today, chivalry makes people think of holding doors or sending flowers, not of burning villages or cutting peasants' feet off for stealing wood. The words survived, but the bodies on the ground disappeared from the picture. So when modern films show a small group of faultless knights protecting innocent villagers from cartoonish villains, they are not just getting the aesthetics wrong, they are copying 800 years of noble PR. They are repeating the version of history the killers wanted us to remember, not the one their victims lived and died in. And that gap between legend and reality didn't just shape how we see the past. It still affects how we talk about power, violence, and honor today. Behind the armor and myths, knights were human, and humans break. Modern historians see signs of trauma in their own words, what we might call PTSD today. Geoffroy de Charny himself wrote about it in A Knight's Own Book of Chivalry, the 1350s. No one should fall into despair from cowardice nor be too confident. He warned of warriors gripped by despair, fear, powerlessness, and delusions, startled by shadows, haunted by screams, unable to sleep. Exhaustion, constant killing, friends dying, all the triggers were there. Templar trials, 1307-1311, reveal more. Knights confessed under torture to spitting on crosses or denying Christ, but records show many had confessed similar heresies years earlier to chaplains or bishops like Pierre de Chartres. They sought absolution obsessively before battles, haunted by sins of plunder and blood. Chronicler Jean Froissart noted, knights struck with sorrow after slaughters, turning to melancholy or reckless quests. Church records from the era prescribe pilgrimages and donations for warriors tormented by guilt. Some withdrew into drink or isolation. Others doubled down on piety, endless confessions, grail quests as escape. The code was a fragile shield, honor and divine purpose to make killing mean something. But contradictions gnawed: protect the weak versus burning homes, mercy versus beheading prisoners. Charny died at Poitiers in 1356, banner in hand, exemplifying the ethos he described, yet even he admitted the inner struggle. Not every knight cracked. Some thrived on violence, but primary voices hint at a hidden toll: men in glory's armor, carrying invisible wounds. This wasn't just suffering, it exposed the system's lie, demanding saints trained as killers. Chivalry tried to tame the beast. Often it just armed the beast with noble stories. Chivalry was never a shield for the innocent. It was a language that let a violent elite feel noble about what they were already doing, a code that promised to tame warriors into saints, but too often just sanctified their swords. We've seen the contradiction laid bare. Knights who burned villages while preaching protection, who massacred holy war's victims while chasing salvation, who oppressed the weak they swore to defend, then paid poets to sing about their honor. Even they struggled with the weight, confessing sins, haunted by terrors, trying to reconcile faith with bloodshed. The myths survived because power writes history. Nobles funded the stories that made them shine. Their victims, peasants, women, heretics, left few chronicles. What remains are blood-stained glimpses, eyewitness horror, desperate revolts, quiet admissions of guilt. Chivalry wasn't pure evil. It inspired rare moments of mercy, loyalty, courage, but it was never the fairy tale. It was a fragile truce between Christianity's call for peace and feudalism's demand for war, a system where violence paid better than virtue. The real Middle Ages weren't about spotless heroes. They were about flawed men in heavy armor, carrying the tools of death and telling themselves stories to sleep at night. That raw humanity, the struggle, the hypocrisy, the cost, makes their world more real, more human than any legend ever could.